Okay, and so we have
Thank
Carol
you.
today. Carol will be speaking to you. She's coming from the International School of Debrecen in Hungary. She's also a member of the special interest group that we have for research-informed schools. And we really have, there's two pieces of that research-informed schools. One is schools that will do their own research to inform their practice, and maybe they have a researcher, but they're trying to gather information to inform their practice. And then we have the strand of schools that are interested in research that help their faculty do research, probably mainly action research in their own classrooms as a way of professional development. So both arms are kind of in action here with Carol, and Carol is representing today our SIG. So welcome, Carol, and we'll listen for about 15 minutes and have informal discussion afterwards. So, Carol,
Welcome,
take it away.
everyone. Yes, thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for coming over here. I'm going to share my slides from here. Let me know if you can see the slide. I think it works. Can everyone see the slide? Okay, great. Okay,
Yep.
so welcome to my presentation today. And as you can see from the title here, it's Retrievals as Formative Assessment in Mathematics. And this is my most recent action research project with a focus on using retrieval practices as a formative assessment strategy for my grade 9 student in mathematics. And as Paul has mentioned a little bit about myself, so I teach MYP and math, DP math, and also I serve as a subject group coordinator in Hungary at this moment. And also earlier this year, I decided to join ECIS as a member for this special interest group. And because I am an advocate for action research. And outside of mathematics, I am a trilingual. I speak Mandarin, Chinese, English, and German, and I advocate for high quality professional growth among fellow teachers as a teacher leader. When I don't work, I am a classical music lover. So it's about myself. And here is the outline for my presentation today. I first would like to discuss why action research is powerful as professional learning for educators. And then I will contextualize my action research project with a focus on hopes and challenges. I want to highlight here that I think the beauty of action research is that each project is unique because of the contextual diversity. Then I will move on to how and why retrieval practices can be effective formative assessment. And after this theoretical part, then I will present findings and discussions of this particular project. Then at the end of my presentation, I would love to hear everyone's comments, feedbacks, or questions. So what is action research? Action research has a long history dating back to the 1930s and 1940s. The American psychologist Kurt Lewin championed action research as a methodology to democratize the research process in various settings, providing an alternative to traditional theoretical approaches that often distance researchers from their subject. Over time, action research has evolved to focus on evaluating actions, identifying improvement areas, and systematically planning for enhancement. McNeef notes that action research is, quote, being in the world means being a participant, not a bystander. We create meaning through interaction, end quote. This quote highlights the participatory and reflective nature of action research. In education, action research empowers educators by allowing them to contextualize educational theories and assess how applicable these theories are in daily teaching. Action research, I would argue, fosters confidence in professional growth within a ever-evolving community when data triangulation and critical reflection are both in place. So, as a math teacher myself, I have observed widening achievement gaps among students worsened by disruptions from the COVID-19 pandemic. Factors such as distance learning and pandemic-related stress have intensified these gaps. Additionally, many students experience math anxiety and have diverse learning needs, including dyslexia and dyscalculia, which further challenge educators to balance adaptive pedagogy with comprehensive curriculum teaching. For international teachers like us, we face another layer of excitement and also challenge. Our students come from linguistically and culturally diverse background and carry very different mathematical beliefs into our classrooms. So I will discuss this layer of multiculturalism later on in my findings. But in general, the math community recognizes that both conceptual understanding and procedural fluency are crucial for student success. Conceptual understanding can be developed through effective representations, while procedural fluency is achieved through instructor modeling, regular practice, and ongoing assessment monitoring. This dual focus, I would argue, is essential for addressing diverse learning needs and student needs. So, what is a retrieval practice? So, retrieval practice is, quote, the strategy of recalling facts, concepts, or events from memory in order to enhance learning, end quote. Many thanks to Paul's email feedback on my presentation slides earlier this week. So retrieval practice is a widely used formative assessment strategy for data-informed instruction among math teachers. It goes beyond mere memorization, serving as a structured learning approach that enhances conceptual learning and promoting long-term knowledge transfers. This method has attracted much scholarly attention, in particular regarding its effectiveness in various classroom settings, such as student demographics, absences, or even students' emotional states. When retrieval practices are intentionally designed and properly implemented based on individual student needs, so-called desirable difficulties are visible in daily learning, which is beneficial to students' long-term building of intellectual blocks. Noticeably, I came across several research papers stating that school leaders should support retrieval practice as a powerful pedagogical tool if meaningful learning and academic excellence are highlights for their schools. So this is my actual research cycle. I was observed by a mentor at my school for 6 weeks in the first semester of last school year. My mentor and I then sit down and reflect on my teaching on a weekly basis. And through these weekly reflections, I noticed and summarized that many of my grade 9 students had difficulties in retrieving prior knowledge and applying it to current conceptual learning. After researching retrieval practices and formative assessment, I designed a 6-week implementation. I included 8 retrieval practices during these 6 weeks, experimenting with different implementation times, for example, at the beginning of the lesson, in the middle, or at the end. To further triangulate my data, I included students' retrieval practice result, my weekly journals as a researcher, discussions with and feedback from my mentor, and then, of course, student feedback. And here comes my findings. So as you can see from these charts, 0 indicates that either student absences or 0 correct response. And you can see here very obviously that there are discrepancies in mathematical learning among my 25 students. So this is a small cohort, but you can see the discrepancy already. And then these are some sample questions and the handwritten responses from my students. So you can see from here, the right one, it actually came from a Korean student who struggled with an English immersed learning community, but she thrived in retrieving mathematical facts that she had learned in past few years back in Korea. And the other student on the left with better English fluency, he actually was bewildered by very simple mathematical terms such as the greatest common factor and prime factor. And here you can see 2 extreme examples of how students retrieved grade 5 or grade 6 math materials, fraction operations at grade 9 level. So the student on the left, after this retrieval practice, she told me that she simply could not recall whatever she had learned in the past. So after hearing this fact, I spent almost a whole semester building note-taking and retrieval skills with her in individual tutorial sessions. And she's now making good progress in my grade 10 math class. And here you can see my journals as an action researcher, reflecting on the implementation of retrieval practices, analyzing students' response accuracy rate, and my post-retrieval discussions with my students. During my reflections, I was thankful for my students' willingness to share their struggles with me. But I was also shocked by how frustrations in math learning could lead to some students directly giving up trying. In addition, student absences before spring break almost made a successful implementation of retrieval practices mission impossible. And at the end of this 6-week implementation, I invited all students to reflect on this learning journey with me. As you can see from here, some students noticed their growing confidence in retrievals, and others became more eager to have frequent retrieval practices to ensure that they are on the right track. Obviously, there was a cultural shift in terms of perceiving retrievals at this moment with my student. Then, based on this, I moved on to a metacognitive discussion with my students. As you can see from this diagram over here, I highlighted that the success in learning mathematics lies in finding the balance among the 3 circles here. One needs to be capable of retrieving facts to build knowledge and problem-solving skills. One also needs to be constantly making conceptual links based on keen observations of patterns in various types of modeling. One also needs to be open to the use of technology to work through tasks effectively. And I would say at this moment of my research cycle, I got my students buy-in. So at the end of this action research project, I asked students to reflect and to envision. I was proud of seeing their growing eagerness to retrieve mathematical facts more actively, and of course, their awareness of goal setting individually. So you can see these are the questions that I ask, and then these are some of the responses from my students. So was I successful in this action research? Numerically speaking, no. I originally thought that after 6 weeks of implementation, at least 75% of my students could achieve at least 75% of accuracy in each retrieval practice. Obviously, I was too ambitious as the reality was far away from this goal due to student absences, lingering worries about mathematics, learning gaps, and learning needs. So, for example, I had students with dyslexia and dysgraphia, respectively, and using written retrieval practices did not benefit their learning. I learned from their struggles in these practices and from my own frustration about not being able to support them timely and sufficiently. I then adopted other retrieval tools such as graphic organizers and oral presentations after this project to support these students. Interestingly, I also noticed how cultural differences affect the perceptions of retrievals. While my Asian students embraced retrievals and enjoyed these formative assessment, my European students struggled with the idea of memorizing fact leading to successful conceptual learning. A disclaimer here, I'm not sharing this from a discriminatory tone. I would say as an Asian myself, I also grew up with retrieving facts from different subjects on a daily basis. And some of the assessment just didn't make sense to me at all as a teenager and even right now as an adult. However, the culturally different perceptions from my student prompted me to think whether culturally responsive assessment should be developed if we really believe in the power of personalized learning and the beauty of cultural diversity in our classrooms. So in the end, I have noticed some limitations in my action research, but I have also found that retrieval practices are crucial for assessing students' learning of procedural knowledge. And here comes my action plan. To enhance my students' ability to retrieve facts, I can adopt several strategies, or we can know together as teachers. First, we should explicitly teach retrieval skills and to connect knowledge. We need to model for our students. Second, regular implementation is the key to fostering a culture of retrieval, as factual knowledge supports higher order learning and thinking, such as analysis, evaluation, and creation. Third, providing diverse retrieval tools can meet different learning needs. And then finally, encouraging student reflections after retrieval practices helps them to learn from their own mistakes. A bit off topic over here, I'm also excited to explore neuroscience research to improve my retrieval practices further. So here is a list of selected bibliography for this presentation today. And if some of you are interested in this, you can scan the QR code here. It accesses the complete action research, which I completed earlier this year, and I'm waiting for publication for this one. And of course, welcome to connect with me through LinkedIn and then continue this conversation. Thank you for listening to this presentation today.
Perfect. Thanks, Carol. Very nice. And thanks for sticking to a 15-minute window. I know it's brief, but I think we understand what you're doing, or we'll ask questions to better understand. And with that, I'd like it to open it up to anybody. Maybe if you came in halfway through, maybe resist the urge to ask questions about what happened before you got here. So if you were here mostly from the beginning, why don't you get the first shot at some questions for Carol?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Tom.
So I'm also in a grade 9 math class, and I have students with dyscalculia and dyslexia. And I was wondering kind of where to start with retrieval practice, basically.
I would say in my school, because we have a really small school and we have one learning support specialist to support K to 12, which is difficult because the person is actually running around throughout the whole school to really support. But what we try to do is we try to schedule time to sit down with this specialist to really have the student. Ideally, we should have the diagnosis for the student. And ideally, we should communicate this with the parents to know that what really support, not just academic support, but also emotional support we can provide to the student. And I would have like their ILPs ready. And I would also discuss with the student because I think grade 9 is mature enough that you can really discuss what's beneficial to them. Yeah. And for example, one of my students, he has dyslexia. He's in my grade 10 right now. And it's very interesting to see that student because he struggles to share verbally or even in written format, but he's really good with coding. So I usually tell him that this is your language. And I tell other teachers as well. I said, well, this is his language. So encourage him to use coding or whatever he feels comfortable to express himself. I think that's the first step I would take. And then, of course, as time progresses, because my school, we use IB Continuum. So pushing students with DP can be really challenging. Then I would think about what are some alternative academic routes the student can take. Yeah.
Thank you.
I love that kind of asset mindset. Like there's things a student can do as opposed to, oh, this student has issues, right?
Yeah.
There are things a student can do.
Yeah. And also like when I think about like dyslexia or dysgraphia, it's not that they're not good at something. It's just we need to find alternatives to help them to think in mathematics. Yeah.
Yep. Very nice. Anybody else? I'll throw in one of mine. Nope, Lola, please.
Hi, Carol. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's very informative. And it's it's thought-provoking in a way, because I know you did mention about, creating culturally responsive assessment, if I got that right. I think that's really critical because when you have children who speak other languages, the way their cognitive thought process actually works in a mathematical setting, see numbers, or whether they have to problem solve in not with numbers, but they have to use word problem solving. It's also really important to consider the fact that they don't actually speak the language, or maybe they're second language speakers, or they're bilingual or multilingual students, and fathom that into the assessment process so that everybody is inclusive within the learning community.
Yeah, I agree with you. And to be honest, when I started teaching mathematics, I was struggling with this idea that, okay, if I have a student who does not really understand, let's say, conversational English, how can I really prepare the student for academic English in mathematics? So I discussed that with my then mentor, a really experienced math teacher, and he said, think about that. Math is actually a language. So if we could support students with the transition from their mother tongue to English as a third language, second language, or whatever, then we successfully prepare students to get used to another language. So that's a mindset I think we should have. And also another mindset I would have, or practice I would have right now, is because when I look around among my students, I have probably 10 nationalities at least. And I always encourage students to have bilingual dictionaries or bilingual glossaries to support them for math terminologies in their home language and also English. And again, it's not ideal, but I think it's also promoting student agency, letting them know that you are also responsible for your learning and we're working together to enhance your learning. Yeah.
And just to add to that as well, I think parents will also find it really encouraging when they have to support their children at home with learning, knowing fully well that there are resources and there are other ways to which they can process the information and support the children. And even when they do come for parents' evening as well, having those kind of services and resources available for them, I think would actually help the whole process of, learning in general.
Yeah, I agree with you. I always highlight that parents are our best partners, basically, to support the student, right? And also like just let them know that math anxiety can be overcome. You just need to find the resources, you just need to have the mindset and keep the communication transparent. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I like that. That's the linguistically responsive approach there. And then you had mentioned culturally, with the difference perhaps of some cultures being simply more familiar with retrieval practices than others, and then so more comfortable with coming up with information or being able to remember information. Is there any other cultural implication that you've stumbled across with or thought about with the action research?
You mean for retrievals in particular, or just
Retrievals in particular or wider? Just as you're teaching math with folks in your school, is it a variety of international students or?
Yeah, but I would say yes. The cultural perception of math, again, it's very different. For example, like usually I see my Asian students again, like they work very hard to get high marks. And some of them, they kind of forget that math is not about getting high marks. It's actually the process of thinking, the process of being creative, or trying to find alternative solutions. So that's one aspect I notice among my student. And in terms of my European student, I feel like right now, like getting know them more, I feel like it's more like you have to show them the purpose, show them how to connect to real life examples, and show them that, look, you're not limited to using my way of solving the problem. You have the freedom to explore. And once they know that they have the freedom, they feel comfortable, and they feel comfortable to share their bold ideas, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's definitely different approaches. Just like the language is, there can be language specific to math, of course. And then there can be approaches that are specific to cultures about how to do things in math. And you
Yeah.
run across that all the time.
Yeah.
I do as a parent,
Yeah.
being transplanted from one country to another, where it's like seeing how math is being done. I'm saying I have never seen it done that way before.
Yeah. And it's just very interesting to see like math is actually universally the same, but also universally different. As an example, I was teaching long division to my student at some point, and then I remember at the time it was my DB student class, and my Hungarian student and my Turkish student, they're like, we have never seen long
Right.
division. And they're like, what? I was like, what? You have never seen that? I learned about that in grade 5, grade 6. And my Asian students are like, yes, we learned about that in grade 5 and grade 6. And then they show me a different way to work on long division. I'm like, okay, great. So I learned something from them as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and being accepting, of course, of that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yes, Marta.
Marta.
I have a question, and thank you for this wonderful presentation, Carol. I'm curious, talking about culture, I'm curious, what is the culture at your school surrounding students with learning differences, and how that might inform their own attitude towards learning, but also how they see themselves as students of mathematics?
That's a really great question. So first of all, my school, because as an IB school, we really highlight being inclusive and also student agency. So we always highlight, okay, so if we have very different students in our community, how do we understand students as a human being first? And then supporting students' need, not just academic needs, but as a human being, again, as a lifelong learner. And of course, I would say that we have quite a few language learners for English, so they can struggle a lot with academic English. So at this moment, because as a small community, we also struggle with having enough English support for the student. So we try to really promote this idea that every teacher, even math teacher, is a language teacher. So as an example, one thing that I would do with my student, for example, if I'm teaching, let's say, functions, I would start from, okay, this is a word, how you use it in daily English, but how you use in mathematics can be different. And then usually I visualize and then show them that, okay, if you don't even remember this term in English, that's fine. Let's try to visualize that. And let's try to bring in your own languages into understanding this concept. And usually my students feel comfortable and welcome to contribute not just their understanding of the concept, but also their languages into this discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Marta.
Thank you.
Carol, I drew a picture of your action research process.
Mhm.
It's a highly technical picture, and I'll share it here like this.
Yes.
So, so starting at the bottom, and just these iterations where you described, for example, working with a mentor for 6 weeks,
Yeah.
where you had a discussion and you worked for a week, and then you had another discussion and you worked for a week and had another discussion. It's exactly what my efforts have been in our school of getting individual teachers interested in whatever it is that they're working on, what they find is relevant for themselves, and then working in some sort of iterative process like that, right? So you're always able to experiment. Do you get anybody in your school who has been like worried that you're experimenting on your students? Although I think we do this all the time as teachers, but I've heard people say, don't experiment. We don't experiment on our kids. But actually you are, and actually I think it's the absolute right thing to do. But
Yeah.
have you gotten any feedback about your process?
Good question. I would say no, because in a sense, my school is quite innovative. We actually have innovative in our school mission, stating that we're innovative community. So in a sense, when I proposed this to my mentor and to some coworkers, they're like, okay, give it a try. And then let us know how it goes. And of course, I went through like all the ethical consultation with my school lawyers and then everyone who needs to be involved to make sure that, okay, I don't really disclose student confidential like details and so on and so forth, right? So
Protection for your
yeah,
participants.
so I would say, I mean, you're right, Paul, that action research is actually a spiral process. It's not that, okay, you propose something, you work on that, and then you get the result. It's not linear. It's like going back and forth, going back and forth. I mean, even during my own research this time, at some point, I was like, I was thinking to myself, am I on the right track? Well, I don't really see the result from my student. So
Mhm.
is it a good experiment? Should I continue? Right. And even as I mentioned earlier, like the numerical result was not as I had thought. But I think it's the cultural shift, the paradigm shift that matters more in my classroom. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something you said in there was important, that you have innovation in your mission statement, and it sounds like you're actually living it a bit. So you probably have support from higher up the ladder for working this way, right? And
Yeah.
it's really, all of us can do it, but you don't want to be doing something and looking over your shoulder as if, this is okay or not. It's really nice to have the administrative support.
Yeah, the support and also just like giving us the freedom, the autonomy as teachers as well to really try different ways, as long as we are supporting students and we can demonstrate the evidence. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's why, I mean, that's why I said I'm an advocate for action research, because it's not just for ourselves. Sometimes it's like, okay, you're trying to show something to convince the school leadership that, okay, that's something we can try. And
Mhm.
they need to see the evidence, they need the safety net as well. So I
Yeah.
think that's the beauty of that. Yeah.
I almost wish it had a different title, because so often you say research and then people get like a different idea, or they feel they have to take on something really large, or they have to be quantitative right away, right? That's all those kind of, a lot of baggage comes in with research.
Yeah.
Maybe it's akin to math anxiety. It's research
Yeah,
anxiety.
exactly, exactly.
Do any of you have a different term that you may have come across or your schools are working with? Some way to talk about this process, this iterative process of just getting better at your profession, but not calling it action research?
I think in general, people have always called it like a professional learning community. And somehow you kind of you build the research bit into that. And
Mm-hmm.
people are actually researching. And, it helps everybody gets informed, everybody's innovative what they're thinking, everybody's ready to explore things and try things out. So I think the professional learning community still kind of covers that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I like the idea of professional learning community because it's really the highlight that we're not solo researchers. We want to share and we want to really support each other there. Yeah.
I also ran across in the past couple of years the term pracademic for that space between. It's not describing action research, but it's describing the person who might be doing action research, right? So Carol is a pracademic. So, but that space between university and high school, let's say, where you can think of high school as oftentimes feeling like delivery, get the content across, and so on, right? But and then academia being think about this whole process. But to be able to live in that space in between as a pracademic is really nice, because you have your feet solidly on the ground in the real work, right? And you have the ability to be reflecting in these iterations on, why am I doing this work? Why am I doing it this way? How could I change it? How could I do it better? I think that's, for me, that's been a nice term to think about in between there. And I'm sure other people have come up with their own similar terms for that kind of person too, but it's nice to see you in action. Carol Pracademic Lie.
I like this title.
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of, I mean, there's, we've seen over the years arguments about whether, research should be, whether teachers should be teacher researchers and so on, or I suppose there's some people that feel like, well, that should be left to the academics who know what they're doing. Maybe the quality is better, or the results somehow, or whatever. I'm just not on that bus at all. I like to feel like high school teachers who have fair amount of training, right? Coming into the profession and are continually updating their background. They might not be, and probably aren't, researchers at the level of somebody at the university who's been really steeped in doing this, but when you do things yourself, you're learning much more, and you're much more ready to listen to yourself too, right? If you did a professional development and had somebody from the university come in and tell you about retrieval practices, it's a whole different sort of emotional connection with it, because you haven't been trying it out yourself and finding out where you went wrong and readjusting along the way and all of that. So really very cool. What's your next project? What's your next action research?
Next project, I'm experimenting with like implementing AI into my classroom.
Okay, good.
And the idea is that, again, I really hate when students say, oh, I use ChatGPT for everything. I'm like, no, ChatGPT is just one of the many generative AI tools.
Yeah.
And for the student to really understand AI well, you need to go back and understand what is generative AI and how to use that. And to be honest, right now I'm still in the process of experimenting with the same group of students. And it's very nice to see that on the one hand, now they have a habit to quote whenever they use ChatGPT or other generative AI tools, and they know that, okay, Miss Carol requires that. And it's also a way to show that I am responsible for my learning. And also it's a way to really teach them, okay, you can still see fake news generated by the AI. And how do we teach them to really discern the fake news from the real ones? And again, going back to my argument would be, you still need to have the factual knowledge. And where do you get the knowledge? You still need to learn how to retrieve facts. So I feel like everything is kind of connected to this idea of retrieval practices, really, right? You need to know the fact to make argument and to discern fake news. And also coming back to Paul, your idea that action research, I always feel like every teacher should be an action researcher, because number one, we study like educational theories back in school, back in our teacher training programs. And how do we really agree or disagree with those theories? We need to practice and then see maybe some theories, they don't work at all. Or maybe some theories need to be updated as time progresses. Just like right now, we're learning, dealing with AI at this moment as well.
Yeah. Because if we say we want innovation in schools, but we start out with all the assumptions that we've all learned and been trained in and so on, we're not going to be very innovative. We're going to be tweaking around the edges a little bit, right? It's not the same thing as like really questioning what we're doing and how we're doing it and so on.
Yeah.
Very nice. Does anybody from the whole group, anybody have something that you'd like to add before we're out of time? We end in just a couple of minutes.
I'm curious for everyone, if you're a math teacher or math related teacher over here, how does your school respond to retrievals in general? Or is like perceived as an old-fashioned idea in your school?
Like, are we like we're losing the ability maybe to actually just memorize things that should be memorized?
Yeah.
Whether it be in math or other things too, I suppose. Tom?
I don't think my school has a stance on retrieval per se, but we're an inquiry-based school. We're also IB. And so we try to teach that way, but I see a lot of benefit in students memorizing facts, because I think before you can inquire, you have to have like a basic knowledge or a basic foundation. And so I've been an advocate for that in my school.
Yeah, but I take a similar approach. Like in my school, we highlight inquiry-based learning as well. But again, the same thing, like if they don't know how to inquire or they don't have the foundation, how do you inquire? Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Carol. It's a Carol and I have not met face to face yet, but we will.
We will.
It's a pleasure being on the SIG with you, and really nice that you put together your work here and a presentation for all of us. I love it. I put a little note down in the chat. If you got to us some other way, but you don't know that there's a whole bunch of good quality free stuff at ECIS, take a look at their events page. Some of it will speak to you, some of it won't, but it's nice when you have an hour or 45 minutes to pop into something and get some new thoughts and to carry on then with all of your individual professional lives. So thanks for being here today. Thanks, Carol, very much.
Thank you, everyone.
You'll be getting a recording too, if you want to share with anybody else. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.